Researchers report funder pressure to suppress their results. A survey of public health researchers have found numerous instances of trial results being suppressed on topics such as nutrition, sexual health, physical activity, substance abuse, with 18% of respondents reporting that they had, on at least one occasion, felt pressured by funders to delay reporting, alter, or not publish it at all. This survey, published in PLOS One, involved 104 researchers from regions including North America, Europe, and Oceania, who have all led trials to evaluate behavioral interventions designed to improve public health outcomes. These trials, between 2007 and 2017, considered the gold standard of evidence used to inform healthcare decision-making. Public health research has a history of interference from industry funders, so the team, led by Sam McCrabb at the University of Newcastle in Australia, expected researchers running industry-funded studies to be the most commonly acting under duress, but they note by quote, "We didn't find any instances of that." In the survey, trial investigators were asked if they had encountered various forms of suppression, ranging from requests to change research methods or alter a study's conclusions, through all the way to appeals to delay publication or not at all. McCrabb and the co-authors found that the respondents were more likely to report pressure from government department funders seeking to influence research outcomes than from our good friends at charity funders or public research funding agencies. They also found that interference was more common in trials relating to sexual health and substance abuse than in trials relating to nutrition and physical activity, although they didn't examine the reasons for this. And a handy-dandy chart, how trial findings were suppressed. Reluctance over publication because results deemed unfavorable, requested conclusions altered, requested reporting of findings delayed, attempted to discredit members of the research team, and all the way down to demanding changes to the methods or the analysis. He who pays the piper calls the tune. They wrote that, not me. Researcher health experiences of funder suppression, behavior intervention, trial findings. We have very much, I think, been covering these stories a lot lately, James. Way back 3 weeks ago, folks might recall, whistleblowers exposed corruption in EPA Chemical Safety Office. EPA overruled scientists in hair on fire, meaning must approve now cases. Here we are again, James.
What? Funding bodies have some sort of sway over the research that they're funding into existence? I never would have guessed it. Well, of course we know this, and if you want the best, I think, if I may subtly say so, the best encapsulation of that, go back to episode 353 of the Corbett Report podcast, The Crisis of Science, where I go over the various ways, not only that this happens, but how it happens, and the various tricks, the p-hacking and other things that can be used to make a study say basically whatever you want it to say, or whatever you were paying for it to say. But this particular article that you dug up here from Nature is an important one for a few different reasons. One, it's Nature. So, you know, it can't be fact-checked away by Snopes or whatever. It's Nature, so it must be right? Two, they actually specifically go into what I think is an important point here, which undermines the sort of the idea in the popular conception of science trademark, you know, the science of the scientists, scientism. Which is this. McCrabb and her co-authors found that respondents were more likely to report pressure from government department funders seeking to influence research outcomes than from industry or charity funders. And that isn't to let industry or charity funders off the hook, but that's to say government not only does it as well, they do it even more so. They apply more pressure. That's an important point of all of this, that governments aren't floating on the cloud. Oh, if only we could make it all government funding, then it would all be about... No, they're saying it's worse. Governments actually intervene more, and they go on to stress that point. John Buckley, nutritional psychologist at the University of South Australia in Adelaide, says it's not surprising that governments intervene to try and suppress results that may not be to their advantage. And they go on and stress that point again. Government agencies such as health departments might be more inclined to intervene if findings from a study they commissioned are not as expected, or if they are heavily invested in the health intervention, such as an education or health program, or, I don't know, their deal with Big Pharma to push a vaccine, maybe, being trialed, she adds. And then they go on to cite the British Medical Journal, which specifically in this case, they're citing an article, COVID-19 Politicization Corruption and Suppression of Science that was released back last November, talking about 4 specific instances of the UK government corrupting the science of COVID-19 for their own purposes. And this is not the only time that the British Medical Journal has addressed this. In fact, this is something of a hobby horse for them. Back in 2019, Time to Stop Commercial Distortion of Healthcare Evidence and Practice, experts urge, and they started an entire collection of articles that you can go about commercial influence of health research and scientific research. That is a ton of articles on this subject and how to overcome it, how researchers can start to find other ways of funding trials that don't resort to these types of influences, etc. Although that's specifically on the commercial influence side of things, not the governmental influence. One other thing that I think is related from, the British Medical Journal, July 2021, Time to Assume that Health Research is Fraudulent Until Proven Otherwise, ? In which they say, it's time. So much of this research turns out to be flat out wrong that it would be more helpful to assume that even peer-reviewed published health research is wrong until it is proven, until they prove that they have the actual data that they say they have, and that data actually lines up in the way they say it does. And the onus should be on the researchers to prove it rather than to say, oh, we did this test and here it is. So there's some really fundamentally important points to be made here, especially in this time of generated crisis. And look, for your normiest of normie friends, you don't even have to turn to the Corbett Report or Media Monarchy or these weird, independent media. No, it's the British Medical Journal. It's Nature. They're spelling it out for you, black and white. Yes, governments and commercial and industry and charity funders all apply pressure to get the results they want out of the studies they are funding into existence. That is the most basic common sense. A child would understand it, but it takes an adult to reason themselves out of that and pretend that scientists are floating on clouds and listen to the Neil deGrasse Tysons and others of the world who are feeding them this latest round of scientism. It is time to break the spell. Let me once again humbly recommend episode 353 of the Corbett Report as a starting point to start to understand the problem, and 354 on open science, solutions, open science, as a potential different way forward for the scientific community.
Interestingly enough, the other main bit of research cited in this Pay the Piper story, a survey of suppression of public health information by Australian governments. Hey, speaking of the police state down under, I love the meme of the Taliban insurrection with them saying something like, hey, if you don't like it here, be glad you're not down in Australia.